feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
All right, Colin, you Canuck. I am officially ready to pronounce you acclimated.
Why is that?
You came into the studio, took off your sweater, put it over the back of your chair, and immediately said, "Oh, it's cold in here," and put your sweater back on. So you are officially acclimated to the South.
I've been acclimated for a long time. You couldn't drag me back to Saskatchewan with a 20-mule team. You don't remember the old show?
I do. Oh, goodness. Welcome to Open Line Friday. Our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, is in the house. If you've got a question for Colin, the number's 1-800-585-9396. That's toll-free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd love to hear from you. Your number is 1-205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. And we'll put you straight to the front of the line. You can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com, or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Follow those instructions. Message and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams. The lovely and talented Richard Jesse III is your producer today, and your call screener is Mr. Tom Price. Our host, as he is every Friday, is EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Saskatoon's native son, Mr. Colin Donovan. Colin, how are you?
Pretty good. I'm feeling a little weird. I don't know about you. I'm glad this election cycle is coming to an end. I am so glad.
This is not our home. That's all I keep hanging my
head on.
Yeah,
our citizenship is in heaven.
That's exactly right.
You have to keep remembering that. And the latest thing, we can't go into it too in depth because of the fact that it involves different candidate personalities. But the latest thing is the occultism revealed in the WikiLeaks emails. And a lot of people, don't know what to make of that. For younger people, this sort of New Ageism is not something they've ever. Well, maybe it's been so mainstreamed in terms of our culture that for us older people who saw it bursting out in the late 60s and 70s, it seems like a yesteryear, but certainly a development, I think, to be watched because we live in a times where there are all kinds of spiritual forces at work, and we look to see the forces of heaven be triumphant. And I think that's always, like you say, we're citizens of heaven, and we have to keep our mind fixed on there, because frankly, I feel a little bit slimed by this election. No matter what point of view you take personally as a citizen,
I'll be perfectly honest. I will fulfill my civic duty and my duty as a baptized Catholic to take my proper place in society, and I will vote, and will be happy to do so. I didn't watch any of the debates. Frankly, my blood pressure just won't allow it.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are stymied by what to do. My own opinion, none of the major and minor candidates would fit the normal Catholic bill for if you were putting together the ideal leader of the free world and of our country, none of them would fit that bill. But you have to vote. You want to make a decision. And I think you have to keep before your mind that at the point at which, by the standards of Catholic tradition, you're dealing with people who each to some degree is either indifferent to or opposed to elements which the church defines as non-negotiable elements of the common good: life, natural marriage, religious freedom, and freedom of conscience generally. That there's some opposition from all of the candidates out there at the level of the highest office being sought. And of course the state offices are no different, senatorial, House of Representatives. You get such a variety of people finding the ideal candidate that a Catholic could feel, I feel good about voting for candidate X. It's very hard. It's not practically possible. There are some exceptions, but people have to realize something that John Paul II, advice he gave to legislators in Evangelium Vitae, paragraph number 73, if they want to go read this. Gospel of Life, paragraph 73. There comes a point where the options are none of them are good. But there is an option to reduce the evil that might come about if the worst option were to come about. And he uses the example of abortion legislation. Maybe you've got abortion up to the last minute of in utero life for any reason whatsoever, versus some restrictions on abortion, such as post-viability or requirement for the life of the mother, or something less than that wide open standard. One can vote in good conscience for what is commonly called the lesser of evils, but he's not saying you're voting for an evil. You're voting for a good, and the good is to limit the evil that the worst bill, if it were passed, would do. So you're voting for that good which exists between the lesser evil and the greater evil. And there is good there. And so the object of the vote is not to vote for this legislation or that legislation, because to vote for legislation that included the life and health exceptions, or even just the life exception, other than the case of an indirect abortion, which the church does say removal of a cancer which incidentally removes a viable child, that's not morally wrong in that case, that unintended effect, tolerated effect rather. But you're voting to restrict the evil that would be done if the greater evil were the one that were to pass the Congress or the state legislature or whatever it is. And so we may never vote for evil. We may never vote for an enemy of the common good. We may never vote for the enemy of the non-negotiables of life, natural marriage, and religious freedom. Any candidate who embraces any element of that, no matter how parsed and so on, is somebody we ought not to ever vote for, except to exclude a worse candidate, in which case, by the principle of double effect, which John Paul II is utilizing in that paragraph, Evangelium Vitae 73, by that principle, you're voting for the good that is done by preventing an even greater evil than would otherwise come about. And this should bring peace to the conscience of the Catholic. If it does not, it's because there's some flaw in their embracing of the teaching. It would be saying that the church is wrong about the principle of double effect, that John Paul II was wrong in stating that in Evangelium Vitae. So if the Pope can state that, if Orthodox moral theologians can talk about this difference as a good that we can embrace versus an imperfect candidate who may actually hold some undesirable ideas with regard to the non-negotiables, then we should have peace in a properly formed conscience in voting against that even greater evil. And that's something to be kept in mind.
And with all that being said, Holy Mother Church has been very clear down through the ages that the preeminent issue is always life. And we've been playing a lot of spots that we've pulled through the decades of Mother Angelica, always consistently talking about voting for life.
That's
never
right.
Talking about candidates, never talking about platforms or parties, talking about voting for life. And we've had the great blessing the last couple of weeks on campus here at EWTN of having Father Stephen Embarato on campus saying Mass in the morning from Priests for Life. And he makes the point, everything you said, we get it, and that's exactly right, but the fact of the matter is, and he illustrates it beautifully, he's been voting for decades at every level of government, in various places across the country. he says, and I think that this would be true for any one of us if we were honest with ourselves, he has never seen a race in his lifetime, in his voting lifetime, where on the issue of life the choice was not clear-cut between the candidates. So the narrow difference, practically speaking,
you can always
exist.
find it. You can always find the difference among the candidates on these most important issues.
And usually without not looking very hard.
Without not looking too hard. And you fall into the trap, however, that voting for the pro-life candidate means voting for the candidate who agrees with the church 100%. No, your vote needs to be effective. If your purpose is to reduce the amounts of abortion, if your purpose is to reduce the scope of the law permitting abortion, if your purpose is to reduce the state approval, whether by Congress or President or Supreme Court, then you have to have an effective vote. You must vote for one that will provide at least in the next 4 years. And that's what before us. The 4 years after that is not before us. An effective vote is a vote that accomplishes that pro-life purpose, imperfectly complete as it will be, regardless, because there are no perfect candidates on this issue. Imperfectly complete as it will be, but it does it now effectively in the next 4 years if it reaches its conclusion of electing such a person, such a candidate.
1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. Taking your questions. What's a question? Questions on theology with our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan. Open Line Friday rolls on.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Now, somebody's asking me here to clarify something. I am happy to. It says, should we really vote for anyone? One year I voted for Jesus. I didn't know what to vote for. I said, write in vote. So I put Jesus. He's the only one I thought could make it and would do a good job. Okay, so should you vote? Oh, yes, you should. Doesn't matter who we vote for. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to vote for candidates. I vote for life. For life. I vote for life. Because it's an abomination to God. The culture of death.
For a guide to Catholic teaching and voting, visit EWTN.com/vote.
Listen to EWTN Radio at any time, day or night. Audio on demand brings your favorite programs, recently broadcasted shows, prayers, and devotionals instantly to you for free. For more, visit EWTNapps.com.
Dr. Ray Guarendi.
I was raised in an Italian Catholic home. We went to church. That's what you did. And now that I'm older, I can't thank my parents enough for allowing me to know about our Lord. Because ultimately the base that they gave me kept pulling me back to the Catholic Church, even though I wandered as a young adult.
The Doctor is in with Ray Guarendi. Weekdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is John Martinoni, host of Open Line Monday.
Hello, this is Archbishop Charles J. Chaput, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
This is Jerry Usher, co-host of Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
To the phones we go. Our leadoff hitter today is Raymond in San Antonio, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Raymond, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, how are you? My question is one that I'm sure you have all answered before, but I just need a little help elaborating. Can you help me provide a proof and scriptures that Jesus Christ found in the Catholic Church? I've done this with a friend for a while, and he seems to think that it's insufficient, and I could use a little further elaboration.
Sure. Well, I think you can. There's a couple ways of going about this. Let's start with today. If you go back to, it's been said, I remember just a decade ago, they said there were about 30,000 different independent denominations and churches.
Right.
And that number, obviously, there are only a few mainline Protestant churches. There are a certain number of Eastern Orthodox churches, churches of the East, and so on. But that's a lot of independent congregations where they're not part of any confederation, and the pastor is, essentially the pope of that congregation. Every one of them has a human foundation. You can find it. It's historical. You can pick up any encyclopedia. You can look at the history, the website of that denomination or that independent congregation, and you can see when Pastor Bob or Martin Luther, whomever it is, founded. So you can just start whittling away and first eliminate all of those. You can't do this. You can't really do that with two institutions. The Orthodox Church. Now, we know when the Orthodox Church and the Roman Church separated, that's a historical fact, 1054. There was a reunion for a time, another separation, another reunion, another separation. And so for about 600 years, there's been a definitive separation since one of the more recent reunion councils. But we know that the roots of Eastern and Western Christianity go back to the Apostolic era, and they can be found in the Roman Church. They can be found in the Orthodox churches and the other churches of the East with apostolic roots. So that at least whittles your number down to a small number of churches that go back to the apostles. Now, how is it that the Catholic Church takes Jesus as its founder? You might say that the Orthodox Church could do that from their perspective as well, and I will, for the sake of argument, I will concede that. But if we go back to Matthew 16, 13 through 18, where Jesus specifically says that he chooses Peter. He gives him a name, Rock, which is used in Scripture only for himself. The only places where rock is used is in the Old Testament with regard to God. God is the rock. So therefore that certainly applies to Christ. But now Peter is given that name, and he says, upon this rock I will found my church, my ecclesia. Now that word ecclesia means an assembled body. It was used in Greek for the political body. In the same way, the same word in Hebrew is kahal. That's the assembly of God's holy people in Israel. And the word synagogue is also a Greek-rooted word, which refers to the physical group of the believers meeting in the synagogue in the post-exilic period when the synagogue was founded while in exile, and then continued on as during the up to our day, as a matter of fact, from the time of the exile. So clearly there is a physical reality there, and there's a spiritual reality. Now, Protestant theology will often claim, well, there's only the spiritual reality of the mystical body. But there's no foundation in sacred scripture for that idea, because Israel was a real entity. Israel had a system of governance. It had a system of order, both secular in the kings and ecclesiastical in the priesthood. And so the physical reality of Israel as an embodiment of God's holy people was a quite evident thing. What if the priests of Israel had simply accepted Jesus as the Messiah, and the church had blossomed from that? Then it clearly there would be no historical question today whether Israel of the Old Covenant and the church of the New Covenant, made up of both Jews and Gentiles, there'd be no question of it being a physical reality. We would have seen the historical reality of Israel being transformed into the spiritual reality of the church, and it would have been seamless. That's actually what happened, because Mary and the apostles were Jews, and the remnant joined and adhered to Christ. Some of the ancient authors assert that many thousands of the priests followed Christianity, and this was part of the reason that provoked Jamnia, where the council in Galilee, that in the 96th, the rabbis basically said that all Christians are thrown out of Israel, out of temple worship and all of that. So we actually see that taking place historically. Now, again, Christ, in establishing this ecclesia, this transformed synagogue or kahal, establishes, he puts the apostles in charge. He gives omnibus authority to Peter, and then he does it again in Matthew 18, gives omnibus authority to all of the apostles collectively, precisely what the church claims when you talk about the supreme magisterium of Peter and the supreme magisterium of the apostolic college. It's right there in Matthew 16 and 18. We see it again at the end of Matthew in 28 when he says, all authority in heaven has been given to me, and now he sends them out with that authority, and promising them in the Gospel of John, in the high priestly prayer of the Last Supper, that the Spirit would then bring about to all truth to them. He, of course, is truth, but he communicates that to the apostles. So this idea of the apostolic college gathered around Peter is the foundation of both Western and Eastern Christianity up to the various early heresies which divided Christianity at Constantinople and Chalcedon and Ephesus and so on, with the heretics going their way and Orthodoxy going its way. And then, of course, the ultimate break of 1054 and the post-1054 reunions and breaks as well. So, from the Roman perspective, the Catholic Church, because it's always had Peter, and Peter never fell into heresy. In fact, at one point during the Arian crisis, only the Bishop of Rome and St. Anselm in Milan held the faith in the West. The East was solid, but only the Pope and the Bishop of Milan held the faith in the West, among the Western bishops. And that promise has been kept down to our day. So from the Roman perspective, that ecclesia continues where Peter is to be found and where the apostolic college is to be found. And then we would speak of a degree of communion, an imperfect communion for the Eastern churches, which have valid hierarchy, valid sacraments, and valid faith, but are in imperfect communion with the successor of St. Peter. So you have a historical reality which no one contests. The Romans certainly knew it. When they wished to destroy Christianity, who did they attack? They didn't attack the Bishop of Jerusalem or of Alexandria, although some of those guys they put to death or put in prison. 30 of the first 33 popes were sought out, pursued, and put to death because the Roman emperors knew exactly where the head of the church on earth was, because it's where Peter the Rock was. So you won't convince somebody, obviously, because of the polemic and so on, the arguments of defense of Protestantism that have come about in the last 500 years. They're there to defend a visible reality by claiming only an invisible reality. But I think the seamlessness of the Word of God, the seamlessness of the plan of salvation makes it quite clear that Christ intended a physical, identifiable reality. For no other reason that he says at the Last Supper that they should remain united, that the world might see that they are one, and they will know where he is. This is where the church is, where the church is one. And so where the church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, is where you will find Christ with certainty, although you may find his influence in others who hold the truth to some degree or have the valid sacraments or have a valid priesthood and so on. But only where Peter is will the church be. Ubi Petrus ibi ecclesia. Where Peter is, there is the church, is an old ancient Latin expression.
1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. Our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, is in the house taking your questions. 1-800-585-9396. Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
If you're currently an EWTN media missionary or just interested in becoming one, we've got some great news. EWTN Media Missionaries has a new and improved website. EWTNmissionaries.com, designed with you in mind. Our new site is loaded with great features and it's easy to navigate. There are so many different ways that you can help EWTN. Join us in sharing the eternal word with the world. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today.
From the Dominican House of Studies, Father Dominic Legg.
To prepare for voting this November, every Catholic should inform his or her conscience. Now, the conscience is not an independent capacity to decide on our own what is good or evil. It involves a judgment about how the objective truth about right and wrong should be applied to a particular case, to my particular case. So it means forming our consciences according to the truth, according to the teaching of the Church. What if I'm unsure about the Church's teaching? Do some reading. Look at the Catechism. Read, for example, Humanae Vitae, or John Paul II's great encyclical on the defense of human life, Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. The teaching of Christ, which is the teaching of the Church, is true, and by His grace, He leads us in the way of life.
For a guide to Catholic teaching and voting, visit EWTN.com/vote.
Augustine Institute Radio Theater presents Brother Francis, the Barefoot Saint of Assisi.
Pietro, I have heard no word that Francis will come today.
He'll come.
Shouldn't your wife be here as a witness?
I didn't want her here. The tears will only confuse things.
Well, if there's any chance of a reconciliation...
We are beyond reconciliation. You see, he is here.
I don't know whether to be relieved or alarmed.
Brother Francis, the Barefoot Saint of Assisi, this Sunday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Keep it right here as soon as we're done. Cresta in the afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Today we'll talk to Rodney Stark about how religion benefits everyone, including atheists. And Nick Tom is going to give us a film review on the new Mel Gibson film, Hacksaw Ridge. That's all at 4 Eastern right here on EWTN Radio. Colin Connie called in from Gainesville, Georgia, and she couldn't hold on. She was listening on Sirius XM Channel 130, and she was talking about a situation she's familiar with where there is a potential for genetic... It's a pregnancy where they have identified a potential genetic problem with the unborn child, and they are encouraging that person to abort, and she wanted some advice in that situation. And Connie, you couldn't have asked a better person or a more experienced person for advice on this subject than Colin Donovan.
At least among my circle of friends. Yeah, I mean, this is a situation my wife and I face because at 28 weeks we found out that our child had a small left side of his heart, had only 2 umbilical lines, so that's 2 defects, and also had another issue which was clearly genetically driven, and they said you need to get genetically tested. So we did, and we got this fatal prognosis, hypoplastic left heart disease, which is survivable with 3 very hairy medical interventions over the course of the first 3 years of life, beginning in the first week of life, open heart surgery in the particular cases. And so we had to deal with that. And the difficulty there is the medical profession feels obliged to send you to genetic counselors. Genetic counselors are obliged to, at least they feel this unless they have a particular Catholic conscience on this subject, they feel obliged to give you all the so-called options, including the euphemistic termination of pregnancy option. And that's just not a good option. In reading about our son's diagnosis, we learned that they don't really know what the survivability rate because of what they call assignation bias, and that is They know how many are born and how many of those born that are survived. They presume that many of them die in the womb of natural causes. In fact, are unlikely to have gone beyond a few weeks of life, and so miscarriages and so on. And then there is this other unknown quantity, is how many are so-called terminated, which, given the name of the movie by that name, gives you the real idea of what's being involved here, terminating this little life. So it's difficult for doctors to even give an honest opinion on this. Even if you believed in abortion, the data is entirely skewed in favor of the easy way out. We, of course, did not take the easy way out. We enlisted Dr. Jerome Lejeune, the father of modern genetics, who was a great pro-life warrior in addition to being a great geneticist who discovered Down syndrome and the medical basis of many diseases, the first person to do that. He probably would have gotten the Nobel Prize, except that he was a pro-life warrior. And he was persecuted in France for that belief. He was basically sidelined in his profession by those in government and elsewhere who had control of advancement and so on. But it never stopped him. And he was a great friend of Cardinal Wojtyła, who, when he became Pope, asked him to be the first president of the Pontifical Council for the family. And so Lejeune was the appointed member of that office, but died before he could assume it. And interesting, he had lunch with the Pope on the day of the assassination attempt, Fatima Day, the 13th, which we now connect with the tax on marriage and the family, based on what Sister Lucia has revealed about that. So, Dr. Lejeune, take this under your gentle care, because we know it works, and he can help, God can help, and if it's God's will not to help, there's some reason in the life of souls why that is the case.
And it should be noted for those who may not be familiar with Dr. Lejeune, we're talking about his intercession. He has gone before us.
He has gone before us. We're talking about praying to him. He has a cause which was started by a Benedictine abbey that he was closely associated with in Normandy. He is from Paris. And the cause is now at Rome. It's past its early stages. It's now at the Congregation for the Cause of the Saints. So he does need a miracle. So start praying to Dr. Lejeune. And the cap on the story is that after multiple diagnoses, neonatal interventions, echoes, etc., 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 multiple doctors confirming, and that when my son was actually born, the cardiologist, after doing his post-birth echo, said, well, this isn't as bad as it looked in utero. We can fix this. And they did one surgery and they fixed it. So whether it's an outright miracle or whether it's simply a favor, we do believe that in those 2 months between diagnosis and birth, that God, through the intercession of Jerome Lejeune, accomplished that favor. I will leave to the church to decide whether it was a miracle or not. But so I heartily endorse him. And, of course, there's Mother Angelica that people can pray to. That's my personal witness, not my formal witness as VP of Theology or as EWTN employee, for that matter. But you can pray to somebody who has a reputation of holiness and ask their intercession and then count on it. And then God will decide whether it suits his purposes to grant that or not.
You know, it's funny because our good friend Curtis Martin, their youngest son Michael, who is just a joy, is a Down syndrome baby. He's about 5 years old now, and when he was born, they were in the hours after his birth, they were, discerning exactly what was going on, with Michael, and one of the nurses or one of the doctors had asked them at some point, did you not have genetic testing before he was born? And Curtis said, no, we didn't have genetic testing. We have a very strict no-return policy.
Well, we did too, and it's not unjustified because there are things they can do in terms of preparation, and so they did those things. Yeah. We had a staff about 20 or so doctors and nurses in the delivery room because of what might have occurred, and that's that was important to know, and that was important to have that.
Next up for us is Vic driving through Atlanta, Georgia, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Vic, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi, thank you. I have a very good friend that has asked me to be the godfather of their newborn, and I'd like to know what the church's expectation and canon law states as the obligation of a godparent.
Well, it's not that there's any specific canonical requirement. I mean, a godparent is one who stands by and witnesses at a baptism, is one of the sponsors. You're saying you're sponsoring a child for the faith, and therefore you assume those obligations. And I think what that means as a practical matter is, when you're dealing with devout parents, they're not going to resist your desire to give religious instruction to the child, to bring them gifts related to the faith, at their birthdays, their baptismal, their names day, to celebrate and honor those things in the family. And in this way, in addition to the parents and siblings and grandparents in that, you have, this, you might say, a nascent unity within the parish community around that child, and welcoming them into the parish, welcoming them into the world. So you can do that, obviously respecting the wishes of the parents. I think it's more difficult when sometimes godparenting is assumed as sort of a pro forma responsibility. You show up the baptism, and that's about all that is ever really expected. And dare you not intervene contrary to the wishes of the parent by, say, standing for some Orthodox teaching that they disagree with. So that's a delicate issue, I think, that godparents have to face. But if the parents are open, then be open to assist in the faith life of that child and in the practical matters, freely and completely. And I think I can see from the godparents of our two children that willingness to give gifts that are related to religion, and they see that their parents are not just the only religious nuts in the world, that there are other religious nuts in the world, and I think that's probably pretty consoling to a little kid. Why are we spending all this time saying the rosary at night? There's great cartoons on television. So it's good to have that reinforcement of what the parents are saying and to collaborate with the parents in doing that.
If you missed one of your favorite episodes of an EWTN radio program, fear not, because we have podcasting available. Podcasting is a form of audio broadcasting on the internet, and not only can you go back and look at the archived audio and pick up that episode that you missed, but you can actually have things set up to automatically receive your favorite programs directly to your mobile device. You can get all the details at EWTN.com/podcast to start podcasting today. Next stop is New Orleans, Louisiana. Joseph is listening online at EWTN.com. Joseph, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Yes, hello, Mr. Donovan. I would like your take from a Catholic perspective on this recent UN resolution L41, and I will quote here real quickly in one sentence. On October 27, 2016, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution L41 to convene negotiations in 2017 on a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. For a quick background, I mentioned that biological and chemical weapons were banned during the 70s and 90s, and more recently, cluster bombs and landmines were also banned. So now we reached a point where 123 nations voted in favor of this resolution. And the great news is that of the nuclear, of those countries which have weapons, North Korea voted yes, meaning that North Korea is perfectly willing to go ahead with this resolution. Also, Pakistan, China, and India abstained, which is, previously they would vote no. So now they at least abstain. So this is great news, but obviously this consensus of 123 countries who all want to ban weapons, this includes, highly secular countries.
Somewhere in there's a question. I haven't perceived it yet.
Yeah, so basically this consensus is not from a Catholic perspective. So my question for you is, what would your take be specifically from a Catholic perspective regarding this resolution?
Well, I think the Church has been clear for 50 years that it would be desirable if, nuclear weapons, nobody had them. I don't think that's the question. But there are so many multiple questions of prudence regarding any kind of actual treaty and so on and so forth. So the statement of the common good here, that it would be in the common good of the entire international community if there was no nuclear weapons, and say peaceful use of nuclear power, of course, is not problematic, but no nuclear weaponry, that's clearly a truism. I think, and most people would probably agree. The devil is in the details, because the prudence of the matter, you cited a variety of countries there. Every one of them would have to be, is North Korea serious, or is just the ploy to be the only country in the world with nuclear weapons? Likewise Iran or some other country. So, yes, as an ideal, certainly. As a prudential matter, you have to consider all the elements of prudence. I think that's there is no Catholic position on the prudential element. The Catholic position is on what the goal for the common good should be. It leaves to the lay order, or the secular order, if you will, the judgment of the prudential elements of how to achieve this, whether particular signatories would be trustworthy if they actually signed off on it, or after everybody having signed off who had not signed off. I think you'd almost have to make it contingent upon everybody or nobody signing, because you don't want the only powers in the world to be the powers most likely that would use them for their benefit, whether against a country of the West, or against Israel, or vice versa against some other country. So I think as a goal, absolutely. Prudentially, that's where the devil is, in the details, and I have insufficient knowledge to make a statement on that other than the moral theology one, and that is, it is a matter of prudence, and prudence has at least 8 elements that would have to be considered in terms of effectively doing this and coming up with the means to accomplish it.
Next stop, Ashburn, Virginia. David's in Virginia, listening on Guadalupe Radio. David, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi. I have a special kind of feeling for Eastern Orthodoxy. I know a lot of Eastern Orthodox people. We get along famously. Mm-hmm. I read an article in a Catholic magazine, I can't tell you which one for sure, about 15 or 20 years ago, that said, if you want to visit an Orthodox church, Russian, Greek, whatever, because they have valid sacraments, as long as you don't intend to make that your permanent parish, it's okay if that one visit satisfies your Sunday obligation. And I don't know whether that's church teaching or the opinion of the author of that article.
I think it's the opinion of that author of article. The Sunday obligation is fulfilled in any Catholic rite. That would be in the Roman rite, in the Ukrainian Catholic rite, in the Maronite rite, in the any of the Eastern, there are 2021 Eastern Rite Catholic churches in communion with the Holy See. That's where it is satisfied. But there is the other circumstance of necessity. If you were in Greece, or maybe visiting in parts of Russia in which there is no Catholic Church, which would be large areas of Russia and probably much of Greece, except maybe in a couple of the big cities, you may receive the sacraments in the Greek Orthodox Church or the Russian Orthodox Church because they have valid sacraments. You can't presume that you can, however. The Catholic Church says to you, we place no canonical obstacle to you doing so. It is certainly a matter of courtesy to the Orthodox that you would ask, say, the pastor, explain your circumstances. I am here. I'm working in Greece for the next 4 months. Would you object if when I come on, that I come here to Mass on Sunday, which you may do. I doubt if much objection to that. But to receive Holy Communion, there might be some objection. To hear your confession, there might be some objection. I don't know. That's, it has to be that mutuality there. But in and of itself, the Orthodox churches have valid sacraments. They have a valid hierarchy. In other words, their bishops are true bishops. Their priests are true priests. Their deacons are true deacons. Their 7 sacraments are all valid sacraments. That is part of the common roots of East and Western Christianity I was talking about with the first caller at the top of the show. So it's not as easy as saying, well, I'd like to go to the Greek Orthodox parish down the street because it's closer than my Roman parish 2 miles away. No, that would not be possible. It's not a Catholic right. But by necessity, for the spiritual reason that this is the only place you can go, you could certainly go to the liturgy of the Greek Church. It doesn't per se satisfy the Sunday obligation, but you can't satisfy it anyway. It's like being sick or having a snowstorm. You're prevented from satisfying. That's called or physical impossibility. So you don't have to worry about the Sunday obligation, but you'd like to go to Mass and receive communion, and so you go and ask the Orthodox pastor in Greece or the Russian Orthodox pastor in Sevastopol or wherever it is you go, and he says, fine, yes, you may certainly receive communion, or I'd be happy to hear your confession. Or he might say no, because some of those churches have a harder line on that matter than does the Roman Church. So I think that would be a clearer statement of the situation.
Next up is Scott in Smithfield, Virginia, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Scott, what's your question today for Colin?
Okay, hey there. So I guess to put it as concisely as I can, the concern I have is regarding the election that's coming up, of course. And obviously you have the hot-button issues themselves, but then you have a vice presidential candidate such as Tim Kaine who is malinformed at best and defiant at worst with regard to church teaching regarding the definition of marriage, and I was wondering if that has any sort of role in the election choice of the laity, and whether or not whether or not that should be seen as some kind of, I don't know how to word it, like as almost a discipline of him.
Yeah. It's a component to be considered for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly a prudential component as to whether you think the person will or will not bring about the policies that you like or dislike. And that would be true also, you could look at the other party. If you're just comparing Catholicism, Mike Pence is still technically a Catholic. You can shed it. You can say you're not a Catholic, but you have that mark, that was the sacrament of baptism in your soul, and there is only the one church. So he's out of communion with the church of his baptism, but that doesn't make him not a Catholic. So you could say there are deficiencies in either of the vice presidential candidates of the main parties. I think the more important thing, and here's what the moral theology tradition teaches us, and that's in the moral guide, which was mentioned in an earlier advertisement here on the show today, at EWTN.com/vote, and click on moral guide on the nav bar. In there, I lay out how the tradition has dealt with this. The principal issue is the object of voting is to advance the common good. Therefore, the effect on the common good is the criteria, not moral purity, although obviously that's a determining factor in how people carry out their policies. Not Catholicism or lack thereof, although obviously that may be a factor in their integrity and your judgment of their integrity and to what they have allied themselves to either with or opposed to Catholicism. So all of those prudential issues may come into the character side of it, but the bigger side of it is the common good. Will the various candidates advance the common good, or will they attack the common good? Will they cause the common good to retreat, or will they hold the line on the common good? The common good, the essential elements of which, as Pope Benedict has taught, are the non-negotiable areas of life, meaning all of the life issues. That includes abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, in vitro fertilization, all of the things which are related to life, where the dignity of man is attacked in life. Everything is a life issue if you're a grab bag person. But on this point, it's about the life and death of a human being, and that's what is meant by life as an essential value. Natural marriage and religious freedom is the third. Now, there are other things that can be related to that. Sometimes people mention torture. The church condemns torture. The same statements on life by which the church condemns abortion very often include torture in there. And if you get a proper understanding of what constitutes torture, then you'd say that's against life. But what's to be different if it were torture that leads to death or torture that leads simply to pain? That would move it out of the first category into a lower category. Policy issues that touch on human life, healthcare, immigration, so on. Unless those are aimed at killing or not killing people, they don't relate to life. Everything relates to life in the generic sense, but unless they are intentionally taking of life, they are not that non-negotiable number one issue. So you have to be careful when you're talking about those things. Those things which are non-negotiables, life, death, that's that first one, the life and the dignity of man, especially his life and his death, the natural marriage and all that's related to that. You could put in gender ideology, and a lot of the nonsense that's going on today is contrary to the understanding of the human being, and the understanding of human being as man and woman being the fountain and source of human life, and religious freedom as something that has to be protected, because if you don't have a free religious conscience, you have no conscience except a secular conscience. And when has secularism or laicism ever produced anything other than a Soviet Union or a Maoist China or a Cambodia, or you go down the list of atrocities over the generations? So you've got to keep those non-negotiables front and center. Don't get bogged down in discussions of what's a life issue. You know that having safe cars can be a life issue, but people don't make cars to kill people, whereas abortions are done to kill people.
On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Rich Jesse, call screener, Tom Price, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. Back at it again Monday. John Martinoni will be in the house next Thursday. We'll be broadcasting live from the 2016 EWTN Catholic Radio Conference right here in Birmingham. And next Friday, EWTN Theology Roundtable with Colin Donovan back in the house. Until we get together Monday with John Martinoni, God bless.